of local stores on the basis of previous building of chains. I think every person in this room has seen for themselves what has happened over the last 10 years. Walk up and down the streets here and count the number of vacant properties there are that were not vacant 10, 15, 20 years ago. Sporting goods stores that went out of business, clothing stores that went out of business. You have seen it. You know that this is transparently not true. And there are studies that have been done around the country. You're not alone in this. We know, for example, from studies by Kenneth Stone at the University of Iowa, who's looked at Walmart's impact on small towns between 1983 to 1997. In almost every small town that he looked at, Walmart's entry into the state took away between 15 and 40% of retail business in those towns. Another study in 2006 found that for every job that Walmart created, 1.5 local jobs were lost. And we're not talking about a small little project here that possibly would do no effect on the larger economy. We are talking about the Godzilla of proposals here. Because here's what we know from the data. We know that contracts have been talked about with 3 chain stores, Kohl's, Costco, and Target. We know the average size of these stores, 75,000 square feet, 140,000 square feet, 174,000 square feet, adding up to nearly 400,000 square feet. We know from DDR's own studies that if they expect the average sales is going to be $475 per square foot. That's $185 million of sales. Now, the argument made by Brian and others associated with this project is, well, the economy has more than enough room to absorb $185 million of retail. Because if it doesn't have enough room to absorb that, there's going to be some problems. Well, let's look at that number a little bit. Brian says one study concluded that locals spend more than $169 million each year on retail items outside of the valley. One study. Notice he can't say my study. He doesn't say DDR's paid-for study. He says one study. So he hides the fact of who's doing what for whom. But it has a misleading implication. And the misleading implication is that we could actually get that $169 million leak of money that's leaving the valley plugged beautifully by the $185 million that this store is going to be generating. So, you know, I think of this, I mentioned Godzilla before. I don't want to walk in the way here, microphone. And it's a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of like Bambi versus Godzilla. Bambi being local businesses, Godzilla being the DDR project. And the argument is Bambi's okay. Nothing is going to happen to Bambi under this situation. Now let's look at these numbers a little more carefully. Here's how the $169 million leakage breaks down. These are DDR's own numbers. 20 million leak in apparel, 41 million in general merchandise, 6 million in convenience stores, 3 million in appliances and electronics, 53 million in full-service restaurants, 8 million in furniture, convenience and specialty stores like Trader Joe's, 6 million, new cars, 32 million, used cars, 3 million. It's a long list there. And by leaks, again, these are things that people allegedly are driving to Santa Rosa to get. Now, here's a curious thing. When you look at the 3 chain stores being proposed, they have nothing to do with most of these leaks. So you pull all the bottom ones off the list. So in fact, the relevant county leakage that we're talking about here is not 170 million, it's 70 million. But that's not the end of the story, because there's a little sleight of hand that DDR's economic consultants pulled in their study that unfortunately no one noticed or dealt with. And that is, it turns out that our little coding of companies treats differently one kind of chain store, general merchandise store, from another kind of chain store, miscellaneous general merchandise. But in effect, these two are the same. So by separating the two artificially, DDR created a huge leakage in one and created a surplus in the other, but then said, look, let's just pay attention to the leakage here, and that's the basis for moving ahead. If you correct for that, the net leakage in general merchandise is not 40 plus million, it's 14. And actually, they also have in that category a $8 million surplus in kind of multi-item pharmaceuticals where you have a surplus. So actually, that leakage probably overstates the fact. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt there. So a plausible leak number is $43 million. $43 million of plausible leaks that could be plugged by this project, and $185 million of sales. You guys can do the math. That means $142 million of cannibalization. Some of that may be on chain stores, let's hope so. Some of it may be on local business. But this is pure cannibalization. There's what happened in Godzilla versus Bambi for those of you who never saw the movie. Now, what about lost jobs from cannibalization? Well, if we have the level of cannibalization that I asserted there, just looking at the total number of jobs as related to retail sales in the county, you're going to lose 566 jobs directly. So you may gain 700, but you're going to lose 566 directly. Now, that's only part of the story. Remember, we should look at the multiplier impact of losing those jobs. So I took some numbers from the San Francisco retail study and plugged them in here. It's not perfect. If you pay me what DDR paid their economic consultant, I'll do 150 pages on it. But I just did a back of the envelope study, okay? And if you look at those numbers, the indirect losses of jobs were somewhere around 180 to 260. And if those jobs happen to be local businesses, you're going to lose even more jobs. That's what the San Francisco study tells us, and that would be 131. So the net losses of jobs from this project are going to be between 877 and 957. I'm sorry, the total losses, and the net will be 177 to 257. This project, even under DDR's best case assumptions, is going to lose you jobs and lose you tax revenues, lose you income, and lose you wealth. That is why this is a no-brainer to say no to. Every dollar in wages by the 700 people employed at DDR's project will be a net gain for our economy. Not. The best case is unlikely. There are lots of things that people need to pay attention to. For example, perfect substitution, the idea that every additional sale in your project is going to plug a leak, even the leaks I identified, is ridiculous. People don't behave that way. People go to Santa Rosa for one reason or another that has nothing to do with the availability of but another 3 chain stores a couple of miles away. The